Great. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks to our panelists. So I want to start with something really general. Oh, I should tell the audience, we're not going to do any speeches or anything. I'm just going to sit up here and have a little living room conversation, and we're going to pretend you guys aren't there. So you could pretend we're not here too if you like, but I wouldn't advise it. So I want to start with something really general, just to set the scene. How do we do on technology generally in Canada? Are we in healthcare? Are we tech savvy? Are we behind? How are we doing? Do you want to kick us off, Rochelle?
Sure, I'd love to. I work with some other countries, both through Hacking Health and through my work with an EMR country. And I think Canada has really made a big push the last several years, but I do feel like we're quite behind, especially when you look at certain areas. Like, for example, we're still struggling with e-referrals and that management flow. New Zealand has had e-referrals since the 90s. It's 100% adoption, and many other systems as well. So we're making good progress here, but there are definitely things that can be learned from other health systems where it's been in place for 10 years, they've learned those lessons, they've made the mistakes, and they've got it up and running.
Okay. And Michael, what do you think? How are we doing overall?
I'm actually Aaron, subbing in for Michael.
Oh.
That's okay, I'll try to do my best Michael impression.
Sorry.
I think, when it comes to healthcare in Canada, we have a great sick care system, but not a great healthcare system. And when it comes to what the future of healthcare delivery looks like, it's preventative, it's proactive, and it's really about investing in sort of those two Ps. And data is going to be the enabler that is going to be the new currency in healthcare. I think that having implement in the public system, it's tough to get some of the new emerging technology successfully integrated, and we need to do a better job about doing that. That being said, there's some very innovative health corridors being developed across the country, and Mars is a great example. And I think we can learn from them, and it's really a representative of a good collaboration between government, academia, as well as the business sector.
Well, thanks, Aaron. Michael would be very proud of that answer.
Thank you, thank you.
Nicole, what do you think? Just an overall state of the nation, how are we doing on technology and health?
Yeah, well, both Rachel and Aaron have made great points and agree with both of them. And so I think more from a pharmacy perspective, I think actually pharmacists are fairly tech savvy. And pharmacists in Canada actually been fairly tech savvy. I mean, look at PharmaNet, it's been around just for years and years. So, I mean, in general, I think as Canadians, we are probably behind in adopting technology because probably funding is a major challenge. But in the pharmacy world, we're constantly trying to innovate, and I see that a lot across the country, especially in the last few years, as Rachel said. So, yeah, I definitely think us as a group, we can try to lead the way and adopt more innovation.
So I've noticed that that pharmacies are more tech savvy. So why is that? Is it because you're private businesses? Is there an easy explanation?
That's a good question. I think actually pharmacists are so keen on trying to help their patients and trying to connect with their patients. So I think that's one of the biggest drivers for pharmacists to try and innovate and do more for their patients. And also, just as the way the profession has evolved over the last few years, we're constantly trying to expand our scope of practice. So with that comes more innovation and more new services and technologies.
I'd like to respectfully disagree a little bit with that in the sense that I think pharmacy and innovation, there's a huge disconnect, and there's so much potential, especially in this area of health. We're not utilizing it. When you go to these digital health summits, you look at the audience, it's dominated by physicians. The solutions are built for them, by them. I think that one of the biggest innovations I see in pharmacy is PharmaNet, and that hasn't changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. But with new modes of delivery and engagement, pharmacists have a really important role when it comes to patient monitoring. We had a presentation earlier by Phil about the pharmacist's role in chronic care management, and how do you use and leverage digital health tools to remotely monitor the patient? How do we set up platforms that allow that? And the United States is quite ahead. And you have chains like Walgreens who already have systems established that allow the pharmacist to digitally monitor the trends and make interventions or talk to the patient about sort of abnormal indicators for the patient. So we can, I think, be doing a lot more in this space for our profession.
But you're right, there's a lot of physicians who go to digital health conferences. I go to lots of conferences, but the reality out there is, like, as a patient, I can't even access my health record. That seems very 1982 or something. Are they really that far ahead, or do they just talk about it more?
I think that's a great question. You know, empowering, there's this movement towards the empowered patient, and it's being driven by technology, by Dr. Google. And I mean, you have, I guess, not a system-wide uptake of, you know, shared EMRs, et cetera, but there's good examples of clinics, even in the interior, that are playing a more proactive role with involving the patient and at least letting them see their own health data. And more patients will, it's the democratization of medicine, and patients will be demanding that they're in charge of their own health. We talk about patient-centered models. The ministry and the government's focusing on this as well. But you know, over the next few years, that's one of the big trends in this area.
We'll come back to patients a little later, but Rochelle, talk to me a bit about, you know, hacking health is often at the cutting edge of bringing in new things. Tell me what you're most excited about. What are the top health technologies coming in? And not necessarily in pharma, but if you want to mention pharma too, what are the big things we should get excited about? It's all about, I keep hearing blockchain now. I'm too old, I don't know what that means, but stuff like that. What's exciting you?
I'm a bit of a data nerd. So one of the major things for me is the ability to use and analyze big data and the direction that's going in when you look at platforms like Watson by IBM, or tools that are able to use analytics to actually clean the data, which hopefully you start with clean data, but not always, sometimes it's garbage, analyze it, and then figure out how you can apply that to benefit both the organization and the patient clinically in terms of genome, BC, and applying those analytics to both medical care, prescription, and how effective that's going to be to that specific patient, personalized medicine, and also your efficiencies as a prescriber, as a clinician. How are your patients doing, and are there learnings that can be gathered for that? Because we have all of this data in all of these silos. We're not able to utilize it. We're not able to learn from it.
But for those of us who aren't data nerds, tell us what does big data mean? It's one of those things we hear, but what does it mean practically?
Probably the best explanation for that is there is so much information that's being gathered from every point. It's in your EMR, it's in PharmaNet, it's in all of these different systems. It's being gathered by the patients through wearables. It's in different databases. It's across all these different unique systems. We could learn so much from that information if we could understand it and understand what it means. Instead of it just sitting there waiting to be touched at a future date, we could probably improve not only processes, improve care, and save money, honestly, and time.
So it's about collecting and analyzing and connecting.
Yeah.
Okay. And Nicole, I want to ask you that same question. What's exciting you? What's the big emerging tech coming in the field?
Well, yes, I agree that this big data is extremely exciting if we knew what to do with it. And you know, being a health outcomes researcher, I come from an angle of research, and I think a lot of that is, the problem with it is that we're not planning ahead of time what we want to do with this data. We're just collecting. We're constantly getting this stream of information. There's no lack of information out there. There's no lack of a way of collecting this information, but it's just, what do we do with it? And none of it's useful if we don't know what to do. And a lot of that would be mitigated if we had planned ahead of time. So, you know, I would be really interested and really excited to see more collaboration with industries and health technology innovators, with researchers, to try and plan what we can do with this information before we go out and just mass collect things.
Yeah, so I have my Fitbit and I can go see my doctor and say, oh, look, I have this weird spike in my heart rate. And they go, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Let me get my clipboard out and my stethoscope from the 1800s. And so you're right, we're not really using the data that's there, right?
Right, yes.
And can pharmacists change that? Are you guys going to, you mentioned pharmacies being at the cutting edge of technology, or am I going to be able to go in there and download my Fitbit or something?
Yeah, well, I mean, we are running research studies at UBC where we're testing and evaluating new technologies. So Ming, when he introduced me, mentioned the emphasis trial. So that's a randomized controlled trial evaluating the use of mHealth or text messaging. It is a new technology, believe it or not, sometimes. So it is being used in a new way in health. So we're trying to see if text messages to patients, and also coupled with pharmacist care, can improve people's medication adherence. So, we are doing research and trying to get pharmacists involved in evaluating technology and how it's being used in pharmacy practice.
And Aaron, you talked about us being kind of laggards in adopting technology. Which ones are you excited about getting in place?
I think that big data is one of them for sure. And I also think that the virtualization of care, it's breaking down the traditional sort of paradigm of what a healthcare institution looks like. So we go to bricks and mortar hospitals and clinics and pharmacies, but a lot of that care is going to be virtual. It's going to be telehealth, telemedicine, telepharmacy. Some of you may already have counseling rooms that have been transformed into virtual doctor clinics. MedView MD is a company that's permeated BC, and there's pharmacies I know that have already set up their clinics. And also, this poses a challenge when we talk about today and celebrating the college is for the regulatory body. At least, you're setting up a prescriber's office in your counseling room, and there's, sort of a rule which says you have to have a barrier between the prescriber and the pharmacy. More so, that's the College of Physicians rule, but it's interesting conundrums that are being put in place for how do we regulate innovation. But I think the virtualization of care, the Uberization of care, is going to be a huge trend, and we're already seeing the provincial government, I think, is entered a partnership with TELUS Health, and they've invested $53 million to allow for a better platform for chronic care monitoring for home health.
But you brought up a really important point. Let's talk about regulation. Is regulation an impediment to adopting technology now?
Yes and no. I think that when it comes to the roles of the regulatory bodies of all the health disciplines in BC and beyond in Canada, there has to be a look at how, what's the role of innovation in patient safety and improving patient care, because the mandate of the college is primarily to protect the public and ensure that there's safe and effective care that's delivered. An example that I like to bring up is a company called PopRx, and I encourage you to Google it when you get a chance, but they promote your medications delivered, and it's an app you download. You take a picture of your prescription. It's sent to the pharmacy in your vicinity that's connected to this PopRx company, and you tell them how long you want it to be before it's filled, and it's delivered to your place. Now, the thing is, the driver drops off the prescription and grabs a hard copy, and then it's kind of verified at the pharmacy after the fact. And so that's an interesting challenge. The other thing is, are you positively identifying the patient through this interaction if it's someone you've never met before? The third thing is the counseling requirements. How is that sort of dealt with? So it poses some interesting questions for the regulatory environment, and there needs to be a look and a strategy, a coordinated strategy, as to how we're going to address the, this emerging technology when it comes to pharmacy practice.
I can already get my medical marijuana in the mail.
Yeah.
So that's the next logical step, I guess, is getting home delivery and not having to displace the patient.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Rachel, let me ask you the same question. Is regulation, is it an impediment to bringing in all these bright new ideas you have in hacking health? Is that a barrier?
I would say it absolutely slows it down. The question would be whether or not it's appropriate or worthwhile, but we had a speaker night on medical devices and how to launch a medical device startup, and somebody who was there from outside of the industry, who just worked in regular tech, not in healthcare tech, raised their hand at the end and they said, well, why would I want to work in healthcare when there's so much regulation, there's so much red tape? Every time you try to do something, it's all of these hurdles, it's months of work just to clear like the legal regulations and privacy and security. Why would I choose to do that? So are we retaining people in this industry to be innovative? Are we squashing startups before they happen? I think partially that can be addressed by bringing in experts in that field at the very beginning so that they can consult when these ideas happen. How do you build the platform out of the gate so that it complies with regulations? I see a lot of people start in months or years, they have a great idea, people definitely want to buy it, it's beneficial to the clinician, and they get to the point where they're looking at going to market and they're completely blindsided when they start to go through that process. They didn't know that they had to meet those regulations, they have to redesign, they have to rip out components of the solution, so maybe by having better engagement between like IP and security law, the government and innovators out of the gate, it might be helpful. We actually had the Privacy and Security Office come out to a hackathon in Edmonton to work with the teams to make sure that they were designing them right at the beginning to comply with regulations. And that's something we don't often see, is that recognition that innovation is important, and how can the government help make sure that things are meeting what they need, but also able to progress.
I was going to ask you that. Do you have the regulators, do you have the privacy folks at the table?
Generally, it's very unusual. We absolutely want them at the table because that's one of the biggest challenges to health tech startups, to innovation in the industry, is figuring out how to navigate that. And if you do have them at the table, it makes it so much easier if they're a partner as opposed to something to be fought against. And
Nicole, we heard the P word, privacy.
Yeah.
Is that an impediment to technological development? People are always worried about we have to protect the privacy of the patient, or I've heard some people say, listen, we're in the post-privacy age, it doesn't matter anymore. How does that come into play?
I've definitely also heard the same thing. There's been patients that have asked me as well, how do you deal with this privacy issue that we could be facing if we are going towards things like electronic medical records and telling people about my health through text messages. So I think there are people out there who are quite concerned about the privacy aspect, but I would actually argue that they're the minority, because I actually think that in today's day, people are posting everything on social media, and they're quite public about their life. And so you do see people sharing their health information in the sense that they're talking to their friends about, I ran 5 kilometers today, and other people are, cheering them on through social media. So I think, we might be facing a time where people are getting more comfortable with having electronic means of healthcare delivery, and not so concerned as we were with privacy.
Yeah, I do lots of stories on people with health conditions, and I've had, especially younger people, tell me, oh, I posted all my medical records on my Facebook, you just have to look it up. And maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I'm kind of horrified. But that's the reality today, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Aaron, how do we balance that? How do we ensure, especially, most patients are older patients, let's be honest about it. Is technology going to leave them behind, or do we underestimate their ability to adapt? Where do the seniors who are using the bulk of healthcare, where do they fit in this?
That's a great question. And just going one step back to the privacy thing, I think that the pharmacy profession is addicted to fax machines and probably funds the entire industry. But e-prescribing is probably 10 times more safe than faxing in terms of the privacy when you look at it. So it's interesting how we're so addicted to that. But I think when it comes to what you say, absolutely, like there's demographic shifts that we have to take note of. And one is the millennial generation, and they're sort of more amenable to sharing and sharing their experiences and their health experiences as well. When it comes to seniors, they're the ones that I think that governments are looking at how we make it cost effective, and part of that is through technology. And we looked at the home health monitoring initiative, where you want to keep people at home and not make sure that they're in the hospital, and that is enabled through technology. Now, it is a challenge. I mean, people who have not grown up with technology, to get them online and on board with some of these initiatives. But I think that there's even an appetite from the baby boomers to have seamless care that's convenient, that's 24/7, and that's reactive to their personalized needs. And that's the other thing, is the personalization of healthcare. That is going to be more and more predominant as we move forward. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, and we can't be thinking of healthcare that way anymore. And that, I think, is very attractive to the elderly, and in particular baby boomers, as they continue to age.
And is it fair to say that even people who are reluctant tend to embrace the technology once they realize its potential? I'm thinking of a pilot project, because all we do in Canada are pilot projects, where they were monitoring people with severe heart disease, and they just didn't have to go into the clinic 3 times a week. They just plugged into a monitor, and they were all in their 80s. And at first they were reluctant, and they'd send a nurse in, and after a couple of weeks, they're like, this is great, you know, I have more time to play bridge, and I don't have to sit in the doctor's office. Does it come quickly?
And that's a behavioral change thing for sure. I mean, that's a whole other aspect, and pharmacists were trained about, you know, motivational interviewing, et cetera, but how do you incorporate that technology piece as part of that? And so, yeah, exactly, it's letting the patient try out the technology and seeing what impact it makes in their daily life, and hopefully it ends up in a positive direction, like as you mentioned.
And Nicole, one last thing on the privacy thing. Do pharmacies, do they have to physically change to adapt to these technologies? I'm thinking, you know, I've been to many pharmacies where there's like, you know, 2 pieces of glass, and I can hear, you know, the person who's deaf who's yelling their entire medical history for the whole pharmacy to hear. Do we have to change that physical layout to adapt to the new reality?
That's an interesting question. I think that it depends on the technology, for sure. It depends which technology you're trying to adopt in your practice. And some of them will definitely need a physical change of the actual pharmacy layout, because we are seeing some pharmacies who have incorporated a kiosk of some sort that enables web technology with a physician so that patients can get a doctor's consult within the pharmacy. And that might definitely include some kind of physical change in the pharmacy space. And you know, we also have other technologies like a biometric monitoring kiosk, and those can go in pharmacies as well, which definitely would need accommodation and more space. So it depends on the technology, but some of them might need slight adjustments. We have headed towards the practice that most pharmacies have a private counseling space. So, you know, it might not be too far off to change to adapt to some of these new technologies.
And I said earlier, you know, we can't talk about health without talking about money. Some of these things, is it an impediment that you can't really bill or charge for some of these online interactions now? We haven't caught up with that. Is that an impediment to them being adopted as well?
I would definitely think that it would be an impediment, because yes, I mean, we're strapped for money in this healthcare system. So, I mean, it's hard to get people to want to adopt technologies when there's often a large upfront cost. It's hard to get people to see that these are upfront costs, and down the line they might be recuperated in a different way. But yeah, when there's a large upfront cost and requires change in the physical space, maybe change in your workflow, change in your staffing, then it's definitely difficult to get people to buy in.
Rachel, I sense you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I absolutely have a comment on that. So I think telemedicine and telepharmacy is so valuable, and GPs are just now sort of starting to move into recognition of that, and they've added specific fee codes now, I think as of last year, that can be claimed in recognition of all the additional work that people are doing for patient care. And I absolutely think that pharmacists should also be able to recoup those costs, because I know that they want to provide the best possible care to their patients, but also their time is exceptionally valuable. So all of this free additional work that's being done instead of paid work, I think that it should be reimbursed for pharmacists as well. And I'm not sure what that would look like, but it's a real thing. I think it's beneficial to patients. I think pharmacists also tend to be very tech savvy and are starting to adopt this, but it's not fair for them to have to do it for free.
And Aaron, how do you ensure that it's not just an additional cost, that the technology actually saves money? Because we've had that experience where we bring things in, there's lots of promise, oh, this is going to be a good return on investment, but health costs never go down. The technology seems to just add more to the bill.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge, because the tech, it's always the cool thing. You know, it's cool, and it might be a good experience for the patient, but sometimes the good experience is not enough. We're always outcome driven, and we're looking at what the role of the pharmacist is in improving outcomes, and the ministry's looking at it, all the peers are looking at that, third party is too. And that's the challenge sometimes with the digital health sphere, is how do you validate some of the apps, the technology that's out there before we integrate it successfully in the public healthcare system. But that's also where the investment should be, in building these health corridors that invest in people and resources, and in connecting research and academia and business, so that we can accelerate the analysis of these digital health technologies so that they can be successfully integrated, whether it be at the pharmacy level or in the primary care setting, you know, with pharmacists and GPs and nurses. And there needs to be strategic investments in that side of things to really allow that validation to occur. I think when it looks to reimbursement, you have to take a step back and just look at the whole holistic picture. I think that it's kind of messed right now how we reimburse, healthcare in general. Fee codes, I'm not a big fan of fee codes, and it's just not a sustainable way, and we just have to rethink how to do that. And it takes courage, it takes leadership, and it takes a will, and I think it comes from the patients and the people at the end of the day, and they have to start that conversation and it moves up the chain kind of thing.
So I've been hogging all your time. I want to get some from questions from the audience. So while they get up their courage, I just want to touch on one other little topic. And they'll be handing me some topics from online. And I think we have, can they ask live questions as well? Yeah, so you can get up, and I don't know if I see it. There's a mic somewhere around, so lift your hand if you have a question. And while we wait for the courageous first to get up, let me switch to another topic. And I'll ask this of Rochelle first. Say there's an entrepreneurial pharmacist in the audience, has a good idea, has a good tech idea. What do they do? Where do they look for funding? How do they get the idea out there? Give some helpful tips that you've learned from Hacking Health, for example.
So I think one of the first questions that you should ask is, are you ready for funding? Because it's sort of a long lead up of things. And the first thing is really going to be to build your team and have some kind of prototype or evidence that you can show when you start to meet with funders. So I know Michael wasn't able to make it today, but actually one of the things I would say is go talk to Michael, because he does specifically work in that industry helping as a nonprofit. So he would be a good source to ask for funding. He'd be happy to help you. If you want to meet people that are great partners, if you want to start a prototype, come to a Hacking Health event. Come meet people, do a 48-hour hackathon, build a team, get something that you can, maybe it doesn't work and you've spent 48 hours finding out that your first iteration is a failure, but now you have a great idea that you can pivot on. There's organizations, specifically Innovation Boulevard in Surrey near Vancouver and the Pacific Health Innovation Exchange, which is up and coming. We don't have anything in BC that's sort of the exact equivalent of Mars yet, but there are lots of accelerators and incubators. And just start there, start researching, come to one of these events, talk to Michael, come to a Hacking Health event, go meet with an accelerator and just start trying to figure things out. There's a lot of people that really want to help get these projects off the ground, including some government agencies and nonprofits that's their entire job, is to help you, and generally for free. So take advantage of those resources, absolutely. They'll introduce you to funders, they'll help you figure out how to go in the right direction. They'll help you meet partners, they'll help you refine your business idea, do your plan, all of that.
So I'll turn to, we have an online question, and this one's for Aaron. Is there a concern with increased forgeries or fake scripts when you're using technology, for example, electronic, sending pictures to be filled as you
Yeah, I mean,
is there more fraud? I guess it's a question.
You know, is there more fraud? It's a challenge. I mean, an e-prescribing secure network would allow the prescriber essentially to send the prescription to the pharmacy of choice. So there's a validation that happens along with it. It's a closed network. That's fine. That's cool. That's safe. But when you look at sort of the startup community building apps, et cetera, there's definitely is a concern. I think from a regulatory perspective is that you've dispensed the product before, I guess, having that physical see and feel of the prescription. And I mean, an image is an image, and images these days can be photoshopped as well. So you really have to have something built in within the app, and then again, it's that validation of the app to make sure it's secure and that it meets the minimum requirements. So as long as you have checks and balances in place, there could be many different startups trying to go for that same solution, but you really have to make sure it's a validated sort of solution.
And don't forget, you can tweet us questions. They're popping up here magically. Just magic of technology. So maybe, Nicole, I'll ask you this one. It's sort of a variation or a follow-up to the question that was just being answered. But how do you ensure that, with electronic prescribing, et cetera, how do you ensure that it says HIPAA is followed, but essentially health privacy laws in whatever province? How do you ensure those are respected when you're doing this?
Well, I would say it would probably go a long way to get the dialogue going early with the regulators and with the ministry and all the bodies that would impact those decisions and those guidelines. So if you are working on a startup, as Rachel was saying, try to work with those bodies to make sure that you're developing something that follows all of those rules. And they're quite explicit, so I wouldn't imagine that to be any sort of guessing in the dark there. So yeah, I think as long as you're compliant and working in the confines of what's allowed in the privacy laws, then you're in good space.
But is there currently like a stamp of approval, like you're HIPAA compliant? They have that in the US. Do we have that in Canada? Like lists for software, for example?
I'm not too sure. I think I've seen HIPAA compliant products deployed in Canada. I'm not sure how that regulatory process is.
Yeah,
Maybe
the
Rachel?
approval process.
I think it's more along the lines of if you aren't compliant, you're not allowed to sell the product. Everyone's very, very careful, especially in the EMR industry, about being incredibly respectful of all the privacy rules and regulations, because if not, you're either going to get sued or you're going to get taken off the market.
Okay. So Rachel, let me throw the next question to you, which is a pretty broad one. It says, how can we get patients to engage in more health tech? How do you sell this to the patient?
That's a really good question, and it depends on both who your target demographic is and what the product is that you're trying to roll out, because some people are going to be incredibly excited. Generally, that tends to be the younger crowd, and all the way up through sort of not all seniors. So for example, if you're trying to address medication compliance in the senior community, maybe don't build them a super fancy app and then not budget time for training and implementation of the app. We've seen great success just rolling out tools like patient portals for online booking, for prescription refills online. People love it, and it's going to be a mix of sometimes they just need to know that it's out there and understand how it's going to benefit them. So it needs to be pushed by clinic or pharmacy staff, it needs to be announced, and people just need to know how to use it. Sometimes you actually need to put quite a bit of work into training and implementation of whoever you want to roll that out to, because I've seen some really amazing tech products that should engage very well with patients, that would be incredibly beneficial, and they're just not implemented properly, and people don't adopt the tool. Like, it never gets a chance to be used properly.
And Erin, we talk a lot about patient-centered care, patient engagement. Can tech move that along, or is it?
Yeah.
Or is it an impediment? How does it work?
Well, I mean, I think you, in the crowd here, you've probably heard of a recent media announcement of Shoppers Drug Mart making a bid for a company called QHR Health, and I think I believe it's a Kelowna-based company, ironically, and they own Medio, which is a virtual sort of physician service, like a telemedicine service. So, that's an interesting acquisition bid, because I think that the industry will be looking and saying, will that permeate down to the pharmacy level? If there's, there's a lot of Shoppers Drug Marts across the country, and their points of care. We talked about that whole 9,000 points of care, like 9,000 pharmacies across the country. If they successfully integrate at the pharmacy level, that will change the game, and it may be a good thing. But for the patient, it's about having an interface that's simple, that makes it convenient for them, that it's integrated successfully into their lifestyle. Because then they're more likely to use it. If it's just another app or a cumbersome thing that keeps on crashing and doesn't work, and it's an extra step, they'd rather just spend the time to go visit a practitioner in their physical location. So we have to be very mindful of that, and it's about integrating technology and lifestyle, and more we're headed in that direction. It's about the quantified self and 24/7, so it's exciting times.
And Nicole, important question that I should have asked, but I'm glad they brought it up. How do you ensure some people don't get left behind? There are still people without smartphones, without internet access, especially people, poor populations, marginalized populations. How do you make sure that we don't leave them behind in the rush to embrace technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think that we won't reach 100% adoption with every single person in the population with health technology, because there will just be some people who are not comfortable with using it, because it's the same thing as not everybody has a smartphone. So there's still going to be certain populations and pockets of groups that won't come on board. But I really like Erin's point about user friendliness. So you got to tailor it to the population that you're trying to get. So a lot of that has to do with knowing what that population needs, what would be something that they could use or they would like to use. So it is part of that engagement is asking patients what they want and what those specific populations of people want that you can develop to cater to them. And actually, on patient engagement, one of the articles I read recently from Canada Health Infoway was a recommendation of strategies to engage patients. And one of the first things on there was listen to the patient. So in every other sector, we do this. We ask customers, what do they want and what do they like? And that's how you tailor your service or product to them. So we just need to do that in healthcare technology.
I just have one thing to add to that, which is I agree. You're not going to be able to get everyone. It's important to just target whoever you can that's going to benefit the most and how you get the most adoption. And for the question about different demographics, we had a project called Thrive Pregnancy in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and it was a physician that worked with pregnant women who were high risk, so they were homeless or very low income, and that was her entire patient base. And she was able to identify with the rest of her clinic that even though it was unexpected, almost 100% of the patients they work with had like an Android phone. They did not have iPhones. So when they built that, when they built that program, they focused not at all on iPhone development. They did it 100% Android, and they got really good uptake. So it's, again, about just knowing your demographic, knowing who you're trying to reach out to, and understanding the level and type of technology that's going to work for them.
So Aaron, I'll throw this next question your way. I don't know if I lost my sound, or have I?
You have, yeah.
Yes? Well, I'll leave it to the tech people. Okay, so the question is, we've already, maybe you'll repeat it because I don't think you do. We already pay an arm and a leg for dispensing software. How do we get government and insurance to subsidize the costs of the maintenance?
So the question was around, we pay an arm and a leg for dispensing software and sort of the initial capital investment, and how do we get payers to kind of also help foot the bill and be involved in this? And that's a great question. I think part of it is it comes from bold policy that invests in the uptake of healthcare innovation across the health sector in BC, and that there's an increased recognition that it's the way going forward, that paperless is the way going forward, and there needs to be care that's seamless and cost effective. And I think that there's an increasing recognition amongst the Ministry of Health that it's one of the ways that we're going to be moving forward. And that, so they are actually making strategic investments. They have a BC Tech Strategy document that is outlining sort of the next few years of their focus on the tech sector, but we can always be doing better. And you know, when you look at MedView MD, I think I was talking to someone last night, and they mentioned that it's initially a $70,000 capital investment. So that's quite a bit if you're a pharmacy, and you have to obviously weigh the pros and cons and see if it's something worth for your pharmacy business. So absolutely, I think just like there's incentives for you know, buying a hybrid vehicle, there should be some kind of funding in place from at least the government side, and third-party payers. I mean, they have to look and see value if there's value in investing money in some of this stuff, and it's not going to break down in a couple of years and be obsolete. The second thing is I think we really need to invest in curating an entrepreneurial community within the pharmacy community. It's so missing. That's what we tried doing with Pharmacy Leaders of Tomorrow, the initiative, but we need to curate the entrepreneurs of the pharmacy community, get them together, start with making a pharmacy-focused hackathon and solutions for our profession. That's, I think, a critical piece that's missing, and some of us are trying to kind of move in that direction. So that's just an aside.
Maybe you could integrate a hackathon into an event like this at a future conference or something like that. So we're almost out of time. So let me ask one last question. Someone is very forward-looking. We touched on this very briefly at the start, but let's end with each of you telling us what health tech trend is going to have the biggest impact on pharmacy over the next 3 to 5 years, say. So how about Nicole, you start us off.
Do you want my boring answer or my exciting answer?
Yes.
So my boring answer is actually I am really excited to see interconnected electronic health records. So I think that's actually something that would make a tremendous impact in just efficient care delivery. and possibly even getting rid of some of those medication errors that we've talked about that put people in hospitals. So, if we're looking at the next 3 to 5 years, I think that's an achievable new thing that we can really make a huge impact with. And I would like to see the fax machine gone, and along with the illegible, crumpled prescription papers. So that's my boring answer, but not really my boring answer. It's my realistic answer, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if the 3 to 5, e-prescribing, I think that's going to come in like 50 years. It's I think 10 years ago it was going to come, 5 years ago it was going to come. It's I don't know what's going on, but it's taken a long time, and obviously setting up an infrastructure province-wide or Canada-wide, it's quite a major project. But I think that within the sort of the short term, we're going to see, and it's exciting, is a virtual care, and sort of looking at the traditional notion of what a pharmacy actually is. What services do they actually provide? Do you need to really be going to your pharmacy physically, to get your refills and get screened and monitored, or can that be done for the patient to where they're at work, at home, through this device? I think that care more and more is going to be taking place through your smartphones, and you're going to be interacting with your pharmacist, your prescriber. There's already investments in different groups looking at the virtual care aspect. And the other thing is, I think that there's attempts to disrupt healthcare in general, and there's a real recognition of that. And there's these innovation labs that have popped up, and I know within the pharmacy space, I think Loblaws is one of them that has one in Ontario, but they're looking at disrupting their own sort of processes before an outside force comes and disrupts them. And it doesn't necessarily have to come from the healthcare industry. It could be something from the outside. So it's about looking at it from a completely different perspective. But I think if you're looking at one theme, it's really making care virtual where you are and making it real time.
And Rachel, finally?
So I'm going to first just second that I think connecting the systems is going to have a huge impact on everything. So shared care and the ability for everyone on the care team to access appropriate information on the record and to share notes would just be incredibly beneficial to the patient, to the entire care team. And I know that's something that is in progress. It's being piloted. Once it gets past all the privacy hurdles, actually, not technical hurdles for the most part. But I would also just like to add that I'm really interested with what's going on with personalized medicine, and that I think having an understanding of, out of the range of medications that are possible, which ones are tailored to that patient and may respond better based on other similar genetic profiles, and integrating that information into the prescribing process and how to process that data is something that's happening now, and I've seen piloted, or I've heard pharmacists talk about participating in pilots, and it's going to have a huge impact.
So I think if I had to put a headline on an article about this panel, I think I'd sum it up by saying, the future of pharmacy, there's an app for that, or there will be. So please join me in thanking our panelists, Nicole, Rochelle, and Aaron. Thanks.